I watched my beloved Victorian home burn to ashes while my HOA neighbor Karen smugly sipped her coffee, thinking she'd finally won our war. Little did she know, I'm a federal judge with the power to destroy everything she built. But how far would she push me before I revealed my true identity? Comment below where you're watching from. The morning started like any other, with me sipping coffee on my grandmother's century-old porch swing, watching the sunrise paint the sky pink over our Victorian home's purple trim. That's when I spotted her, Karen Thompson, power walking toward my mailbox with an envelope clutched in her manicured hands like it was made of gold. I'd seen that determined look before during the neighborhood meetings she'd started hosting at her newly renovated McMansion next door. I felt my stomach tighten as she dropped the envelope in my box and lingered, making sure to take photos of my front yard with her phone. My grandmother's roses were in full bloom, their wild beauty a stark contrast to Karen's perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges. I knew she hated every unruly petal. The envelope contained what she called an exciting opportunity, a formal invitation to join their newly formed HOA, complete with a glossy brochure showing identical beige houses with matching mailboxes. The membership fee was $5,000, with monthly dues of $350. But that wasn't what made my hands shake. It was the mandatory property modifications list attached. Remove all non-approved paint colors, including my grandmother's beloved purple trim. Replace the heritage rose garden with approved vegetation. And take down the antique wind chimes that had sung me to sleep every night since childhood. I watched Karen through my window as she walked next door, phone pressed to her ear. Yes, I just delivered the final invitation. She'll have to join now. Her house is the last holdout on the street. Her voice carried that fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. Once we get her property in line, this neighborhood's value will skyrocket. That evening, I walked to Karen's house, invitation in hand. Her doorbell played a chiming version of "We Are the Champions." Of course it did. She answered wearing a neighborhood watch captain badge, lips stretched in what I guess she thought was a welcoming smile. "I've reviewed your invitation," I said calmly, my years of professional experience keeping my voice steady. "I need to decline. This house has been in my family for 3 generations, and I intend to preserve its historic character." Her smile vanished faster than free cookies at a bake sale. "You don't understand," she said, leaning forward. "This isn't really an invitation. The HOA has already been registered. Your property is surrounded by HOA members. You have to join." I pulled out the property maps I'd researched that afternoon. Actually, that's incorrect. My deed predates any HOA agreements, and I have no legal obligation to join. 20 years of legal experience had taught me to always do my homework. Karen's face turned an interesting shade of red. "Listen here," she hissed, dropping the fake niceness. "This neighborhood is changing. Progress is happening. If you don't get with the program, things might get difficult. Accidents happen to houses that don't meet code. Citations get filed. Fines add up." I met her gaze steadily. "Is that a threat, Mrs. Thompson?" She stepped back, sugary smile returning. "Of course not. I'm just concerned about your property values. And safety, of course. Old houses like yours can be so unpredictable. Electrical problems, structural issues. It would be terrible if something happened because you refuse to modernize." Behind her, I could see her husband watching through their window, phone in hand. Something about his stance made me uneasy. I nodded politely and turned to leave, but Karen's voice stopped me. "1 week," she called after me. "You have 1 week to reconsider before the HOA board meets to discuss enforcement options." Walking home, I noticed new faces watching from their windows. Karen's HOA allies, no doubt. Something told me this wasn't going to end with a simple declined invitation. I spent that night installing security cameras around my property, making sure to document their current condition. I'd learned long ago to trust my instincts, and right now, they were screaming that Karen Thompson was just getting started. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't just about property values or purple trim. In my 3 decades of dealing with difficult people, I'd never encountered someone like Karen. As I fell asleep to the gentle sound of my grandmother's wind chimes, I had no idea that this was just the beginning of a war that would change everything, and that my beloved Victorian home would become its first casualty. But Karen had made one crucial mistake in choosing her target. She just didn't know it yet. The morning started with Karen's shrill voice outside my window. "Look at those hideous purple trims. They're destroying our property values. I peeked through my curtains to find her leading a group of HOA members on what they called their morning inspection. My heart sank as I watched them photograph every inch of my grandmother's beloved home. I tried to enjoy my morning coffee on the porch, but their whispers carried across the lawn. Did you see those ancient wind chimes? They're not HOA approved. And those roses, they're 3 inches taller than regulation. Every day brought new complaints, each more ridiculous than the last. They started leaving warning letters, bright orange papers taped to my door about violations that didn't exist before their HOA. My heritage rose garden, planted by my grandmother herself, was suddenly a neighborhood nuisance. The authentic Victorian purple trim, which tourists used to photograph, became their biggest target. One Tuesday morning, I found Karen measuring my grass with a ruler. 11.5 inches, she announced triumphantly to her sidekick, Barbara, who furiously scribbled in a notebook. That's 3.5 inches over code. I walked out calmly, coffee in hand. You're trespassing on private property, I stated firmly, knowing my legal rights, but keeping my profession private. Karen just smirked and took more photos. The harassment got creative. They'd schedule landscapers to show up at 7 a.m. sharp on Saturdays, their equipment conveniently loudest near my bedroom window. Anonymous complaints to code enforcement became weekly events. Each time, I calmly showed the officials my property's historic status documentation, watching Karen fume from her window. They tried psychological warfare next. Karen organized HOA meetings in her driveway, right outside my home office. I'd hear them discussing how some people were bringing down the neighborhood's reputation, how certain houses needed to be dealt with for everyone's good. My security cameras caught them testing my patience. They'd let their dogs use my yard as a bathroom, then act shocked when I showed them the footage. Oh, my precious Bentley would never. Karen would gasp, clutching her pearls while her massive golden doodle left another present on my lawn. The breaking point came during their annual block party. I wasn't invited, of course, but I could hear Karen loudly discussing plans to revitalize the neighborhood. Some older properties, she announced, glancing at my house, just don't fit our community's vision anymore. That's when I noticed people taking photos of my home's foundation, whispering about structural concerns. I stayed calm, documenting everything. Each letter, every photo, all the anonymous complaints. I filed them methodically. When they installed bright security lights aimed at my bedroom windows, I added light pollution to my growing evidence file. My grandmother taught me patience, and as I watched Karen's group grow bolder, I knew timing would be everything. That night, reviewing my security footage, I caught something disturbing. 2 HOA board members were examining my property line markers, whispering about easement regulations. I recognized that look. They were planning something bigger. But what they didn't know was that I'd spent my career dealing with people who thought they were above the law. As I turned off my porch light that evening, watching Karen's group huddle in her driveway, I wondered how long I should wait before showing them exactly who they were messing with. I never expected to find Karen and 2 other HOA board members skulking around my property at midnight. But there they were, illuminated by my kitchen light as I got up for a glass of water. My heart stopped when I saw the chemical sprayers in their hands, pointed directly at my grandmother's century-old rose garden. What do you think you're doing? I called out from my porch, phone already recording. Karen jumped but quickly regained her composure, that fake smile spreading across her face like poison. Oh, we're just helping eliminate these invasive species, she said sweetly, continuing to spray my roses. The HOA has strict rules about non-native plants. If you just join us, we could handle these issues properly. I walked closer, blood boiling but voice steady. Those aren't invasive species, Karen. They're heritage Victorian roses, planted by my grandmother in 1960. I have the original documentation and Gardening Society registration. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, but Karen stood her ground. Well, someone complained about the smell, she sniffed, adjusting her designer pajamas. And these thorns are a safety hazard for children walking by. On my private property, behind my fence. I challenged, switching on my security lights. The property line is clearly marked, and you're trespassing. That's when Bob, Karen's husband, emerged from the shadows. As a retired police sergeant, he thought he could intimidate anyone. Now, let's not throw around accusations. We're just trying to maintain neighborhood standards. Nobody wants to live next to a jungle. I noticed Mrs. Watson, my elderly neighbor across the street, peeking through her curtains. She'd been bullied into joining the HOA last month after similar late-night visits. Her beautiful rock garden had been replaced with Karen-approved generic shrubs within days. The next morning, my roses were dead. Their once vibrant petals turned black and withered. But Karen had made a crucial mistake. She'd unknowingly revealed the HOA's pattern of targeting specific homeowners. I spent my lunch break at the county records office, discovering that every house that initially refused to join the HOA had experienced mysterious accidents or code violations until they sold. I installed high-definition security cameras that afternoon, hiding them carefully among my remaining plants. That evening, Karen paraded potential buyers past my property. "Of course, this eyesore will be dealt with soon," she announced loudly. "We have ways of handling difficult residents." The following week brought an endless stream of harassment. My mailbox was knocked over 3 times. Anonymous complaints were filed about noise, on days I wasn't even home. Code enforcement officers appeared daily, finding nothing but returning anyway. My garbage bins disappeared, only to be found in violation of HOA rules. I documented everything meticulously, building my case quietly. But Karen's group grew bolder. They started hosting HOA meetings in front of my house, pointing out every perceived flaw to potential new residents. "This property is driving down home values," Karen would declare, waving her designer handbag for emphasis. "But don't worry, it won't be a problem much longer." The final straw came when I caught them tampering with my historic fence posts, carefully loosening them while pretending to measure the sidewalk. My security cameras caught Karen instructing her minions. "Once these posts fail inspection, she'll have to replace the whole fence with our approved model. That'll cost her thousands, unless she joins the HOA, of course." That night, as I reviewed the footage, I noticed something strange. The HOA's inspection team always included someone taking photos of my electrical boxes, gas lines, and other utilities. They were methodically documenting every potential vulnerability of my home. But why? The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed sent a chill down my spine. I knew I needed to act fast, but I couldn't reveal my hand too soon. What I didn't know then was that Karen had already set in motion a plan that would change everything, a plan that would bring all my worst fears blazing to life. My hands trembled as I held up the morning paper, reading the headline about how I'd just sentenced a corrupt CO to prison. The courtroom was dead silent when my clerk Emily burst through the doors, her face ghost white. "Your Honor, your house, it's on fire." Those 5 words made my blood run cold. I threw off my black robes and raced down the courthouse steps, my heart pounding against my chest. 15 minutes. That's all it took to drive home, but it felt like forever. I could see the black smoke rising from 3 blocks away, and my stomach turned to ice. The gorgeous purple trim my grandmother had lovingly painted was now being eaten away by angry orange flames. As I screeched to a halt in front of my burning home, firefighters were already battling the inferno. The heat hit me like a wall, and I could hear the ancient wooden beams groaning under the assault of the flames. Everything my family had built over 3 generations was disappearing before my eyes. Through my tears, I spotted Karen standing in her driveway in her designer yoga pants, sipping her overpriced coffee like she was watching a morning show. Her perfectly styled blonde hair gleamed in the sunlight as she chatted with other HOA board members. They weren't even trying to hide their satisfaction, whispering and pointing at different parts of my burning home. Fire Chief Martinez approached me, his face grim. "Ma'am, it looks like an electrical fire. These old houses, their wiring can be dangerous." But I knew better. Just yesterday, I'd had my annual electrical inspection. Everything was up to code, just like always. I'd made sure of it after Karen's threats about unsafe historic properties at the last town meeting. My security cameras. The thought hit me like lightning. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking as I tried to access the footage. The screen was blank. The cameras had mysteriously stopped recording at 3 a.m., exactly 4 hours before the fire started. This was no coincidence. As I watched my home burn, memories flashed through my mind. Learning to bake cookies in that kitchen with Grandma, celebrating my law school graduation in the garden, my first day as a judge. All going up in smoke because I wouldn't bow to Karen's demands to join her precious HOA. Through the crowd of onlookers, I spotted 2 familiar faces, Bob Johnson and Mike Peters, both HOA board members, trying to blend in with the growing crowd of neighbors. But their shoes caught my eye, the same distinctive work boots I'd seen on my security footage last week when my rose bushes were vandalized. Now they were covered in what looked like fresh mud. Or was it ash? Karen strutted over, her face a mask of fake concern. "Oh, this is just terrible. If only you joined our HOA. We have such strict safety requirements. But you were so stubborn about keeping things historic." She emphasized the last word like it was dirty, taking another slow sip of her coffee. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Not yet. I couldn't reveal my hand yet. Instead, I watched as she pulled out her phone, quickly typing something. Moments later, I overheard another neighbor talking about a fantastic deal on premium land that had just been listed in some exclusive real estate group. The fire department finally got the blaze under control, but it was too late. The beautiful Victorian windows were shattered, the hand-carved porch railings were charred beyond recognition, and the roof had partially collapsed. A century of history, destroyed in just hours. As I stood there, watching the smoke rise into the morning sky, I made a decision. Karen thought she'd won, thought she'd broken me. But she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. One to my friend at the FBI, one to my contact at the state attorney's office, and one to a private investigator I trusted. I caught Karen watching me make those calls, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face for just a moment. She didn't know who I was calling, but something in my determined stance must have worried her. Good. Let her worry. Because while my house lay in ruins, my real power had nothing to do with property and everything to do with justice. As the sun rose higher in the sky, I picked up a small, charred piece of the purple trim. Grandma had always told me that sometimes you have to lose everything to gain the strength to fight back. Looking at Karen's smug face one last time, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. But first, I had to understand just how deep this HOA's corruption really went. Standing in the ashes of my grandmother's home, I made a promise that turned my grief into purpose. While Karen paraded around the neighborhood spreading rumors that I'd burned my own house for insurance money, I was quietly pulling threads that would unravel her entire empire. My first breakthrough came when my old law school friend, now a real estate investigator, discovered something odd. Every house that mysteriously burned in our county over the past 5 years was sold to the same shell company. The owner? Karen's sister-in-law. I felt my hands shake as I dug deeper into property records, each page revealing a pattern too perfect to be coincidence. I hired a private investigator who interviewed former neighbors who'd lost their homes. Their stories match mine exactly. Join the HOA or face harassment, followed by mysterious accidents or fires. Most had given up and sold their homes for pennies on the dollar to Karen's investment group. One elderly man broke down crying as he described losing his family photos in a suspicious garage fire the day after refusing to join. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Karen's former assistant treasurer, who reached out through my lawyer. Over coffee at a quiet diner 2 towns over, she handed me a USB drive with 5 years of HOA financial records. Her hands trembled as she explained how Karen had forced her to cook the books, threatening to reveal her undocumented status if she refused. The documents showed hundreds of thousands in mysterious cash deposits after each accidental fire. I spent sleepless nights connecting the dots. Karen's husband hadn't just retired from the police force. He'd been the fire investigator. Every suspicious fire in their territory had been quickly ruled an accident, with no further questions asked. The insurance companies had paid out millions based on his reports. My security cameras had caught more than just the arsonists. They'd recorded weekly meetings at Karen's house with real estate developers, all salivating over plans to build luxury condos where our historic homes once stood. One developer bragged about bribing city officials to change zoning laws once enough properties had been acquired. I discovered Karen's pattern. Target homes in prime locations, especially historic properties that couldn't be easily replicated. She'd use HOA rules to harass owners, then escalate to vandalism and threats. If that didn't work, mysterious accidents would follow. Her group would then swoop in to help the distressed homeowners by buying their properties at fraction of their worth. Working late one night, I found the smoking gun in old county records. Karen had done this before. 3 other historic neighborhoods in nearby counties had suffered the same fate. She'd move in, form an HOA, drive out resistant homeowners, then sell the consolidated properties to developers for millions. She'd even won community service awards for neighborhood improvement. The evidence was damning, but I needed more. I convinced the FBI to wire up the former treasurer for a meeting with Karen. The recording captured everything. Karen bragging about their next targets, joking about which houses might have electrical problems, and threatening to make the treasurer disappear if she ever talked. Each day, I watched Karen strut around the neighborhood, planning her next move while I secretly built my case. She had no idea that every smug wave, every fake, sympathetic comment about my tragic accident was being documented. Her confidence would be her downfall. The final piece fell into place when I discovered why she'd targeted my house specifically. Hidden in the city archives was an old map showing a planned highway expansion. Karen's developer friends had inside information. My property was key to their plan for a new shopping complex. They'd already bought the surrounding land through shell companies, but my house was the linchpin. Without it, their entire multi-million-dollar project would fail. As I organized the evidence for the FBI, Karen's desperation grew. She filed daily complaints about my unsightly property, now just a burned shell. She even had the nerve to propose a special HOA assessment to clean up my lot, money that would go straight into her pocket. Little did she know, every move she made only strengthened my case. I stood outside the community center, my heart pounding as I watched Karen strut through the entrance, carrying her signature coffee mug and a stack of papers. Tonight's HOA meeting would be different. After 6 months of careful planning, I'd finally show her who she'd been messing with all this time. Through the window, I could see her setting up her PowerPoint presentation, probably filled with more fake violation photos and made-up rules. My hands trembled slightly as I touched my judicial robes, neatly folded in my briefcase. The weight of the FBI wire under my blazer reminded me that everything had to be perfect. The property at 247 Maple Street has been declared a public nuisance. Karen's voice boomed through the room as I quietly opened the door. As per our emergency powers, we'll be moving forward with immediate redevelopment plans. A chorus of confused murmurs filled the room. My neighbors, the decent ones who'd been too scared to stand up to her, shifted uncomfortably in their plastic chairs. Any objections? Karen smirked, scanning the room with her beady eyes. No? Well then, let me show you our exciting plans for Dash. I object, Mrs. Thompson. My voice cut through the tension like a knife. Every head turned toward the entrance. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Karen's smirk flickered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. Well, come to finally admit defeat? Your burned-out wreck of a house is quite the eyesore. We're doing you a favor, really. She took a long sip from her coffee mug, that same smug smile she wore while watching my house burn. I reached into my briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. Actually, I'm here to present some evidence of my own. I opened the folder, spreading out photographs across the table. These security camera stills show you and your board members on my property the night of the fire. Interesting timing, don't you think? Karen's face twitched. Those could be anyone. And besides, you can't prove Dash. Oh, but I can. I pulled out more documents. Bank records showing mysterious payments to your shell company after each distressed property sale. Emails discussing your plans to force out non-HOA members. And my personal favorite, your text messages about making sure the electrical fire looked accidental. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Karen's hands started shaking, coffee sloshing over the rim of her mug. This is ridiculous. You can't just come in here with these wild accusations. I'll sue you for defamation. That was my cue. I reached back into my briefcase one final time, pulling out my judicial robes. The silk fabric unfurled dramatically as I slipped them on. Federal Judge Sarah Martinez, I announced, watching the blood drain from Karen's face. Currently presiding over case number 2025, CR 142, United States versus Thompson et al. A RICO investigation into corruption, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Her coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The hot liquid splashed across her designer shoes, but she didn't even notice. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. FBI. Nobody moved. Right on cue, Agents burst through both doors, badges raised. Karen's husband, the retired sergeant who'd buried all those police reports, tried to make a break for the emergency exit. He didn't make it 3 steps before being tackled. I walked up to Karen, who had collapsed into her precious president's chair. You know what the biggest mistake criminals make? They get so caught up in their own power, they forget to check who they're really dealing with. I picked up her fallen gavel, the one she'd used to sentence my home to destruction. Meeting adjourned. The click of handcuffs echoed through the room as the FBI led Karen and her board members away. My neighbors erupted in applause, years of fear and intimidation finally broken. As I packed up my evidence, old Mrs. Johnson from across the street hugged me with tears in her eyes. "We should have helped you fight them," she whispered. I hugged her back, watching Karen being escorted to a waiting police car. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "justice needs to take the long road to make sure it arrives at the right destination." The morning of the trial felt different. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, straightening my judge's robe, thinking about how Karen had laughed when my house burned. Now she wasn't laughing anymore. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, reporters, and victims from other neighborhoods who'd come forward after seeing our story on the local news. Karen walked in wearing an expensive suit instead of her usual yoga pants, but her face turned ghost white when she saw me sitting at the bench. I'll never forget how she grabbed her lawyer's arm and whispered, "That's her, the one whose house we burned." Her lawyer dropped his pen. The evidence we presented was shocking. Our investigation had uncovered 15 other houses that mysteriously caught fire after refusing to join Karen's HOA. The pattern was always the same: harassment, vandalism, then fire. They'd buy the burned properties for pennies through a shell company owned by Karen's brother-in-law. They'd already made millions. We played the security footage from my cameras. The whole courtroom gasped watching Karen and her HOA friends spreading gasoline around my grandmother's rose bushes at 2 a.m. Karen kept shaking her head, mouthing no, as her own voice came through the speakers. Once it burns, she'll have to sell. The real surprise came when Karen's husband, the retired police sergeant, turned against her. He'd been keeping quiet out of loyalty, but seeing the evidence broke him. He told everything: how they planned it all, how they picked their targets, how they bribed local officials to look the other way. Karen screamed, "Liar," so loud the bailiff had to remove her. One by one, people stood up to tell their stories. Mrs. Rodriguez, the retired teacher who lost her family photos. The Patel family, whose grandfather's ashes were destroyed. Each story made Karen shrink smaller in her chair. Her designer suit couldn't hide how scared she was now. When I read the verdict, my voice didn't shake. 25 years for Karen, 15 for each board member. Their faces showed they finally understood. No amount of money could save them from justice. Karen tried to give a speech about how she was just trying to protect property values, but I cut her off. The same way she'd cut off my explanations about my grandmother's roses. That was 6 months ago. Today, I'm watching the construction workers put the finishing touches on my rebuilt Victorian. The purple trim is exactly how Grandma painted it. The rose garden is coming back, with cuttings from the one surviving bush. Karen's house was sold to pay victim compensation. A lovely immigrant family lives there now. Their kids play in the yard where Karen used to stand taking photos of my violations. The new neighbors created a real community association, not an HOA, but a group that actually helps each other. We have block parties in my garden. Everyone brings food and shares stories. Yesterday, Mrs. Rodriguez brought her famous empanadas and showed me the family photos her daughter had managed to restore from damaged albums. Sometimes when I'm working in my garden, people stop to thank me, not for being a judge, but for standing up to bullies. The local news did a follow-up story about how we transformed from the neighborhood Karen terrorized into a real community. They interviewed the Patels, who now host our monthly meetings in their beautiful backyard. I keep Karen's coffee cup on my desk at the courthouse, the one she dropped when she realized who I was. It reminds me that justice might work slowly, but it works surely, just like my grandmother always said. And every morning, I sip my own coffee in my rose garden, watching the sun rise through my perfectly purple-trimmed windows, knowing that sometimes the best revenge is simply rebuilding something more beautiful than what was destroyed.